Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello, welcome to Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. I was on a panel with a lot of different people in the medical marijuana space, doctors, nurses, and patients. So we will show that panel, which took place at the Chinook Winds Resort and Casino in Newport, Oregon, which is actually in the indigenous nation of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. And so it was great to go there. It was kind of groundbreaking doing that at that location. And so it was a cannabis and health panel. And I'll itemize the participants after we bring on our hemp news and our infamous dancing. Cannabis, leaves.
I feel the force.
Well, basically, with our hemp news this week, the big news is on Tuesday, the Department of Justice affirmed the Drug Enforcement Administration has finally concurred with the Health and Human Services recommendation to move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. It's been at Schedule 1 since the schedule was introduced in 1972. While the DEA's opinion to reschedule cannabis fails to go far enough, it represents the first time the agency has ever abandoned its prohibitionist policy toward cannabis and acknowledged that the substance possesses legitimate therapeutic utility. Still, it continues to perpetuate the growing divide between federal marijuana laws and marijuana legalization laws of a growing number of states. It also fails to align with public opinion, as most Americans agree that cannabis should be treated more like alcohol and regulated by the states without federal interference than like hydrocodone or ketamine, which are other Schedule 3 substances, hydrocodone being codeine. Nevertheless, this decision marks both a symbolic and a very tangible victory. Once enacted, this move will provide immediate benefits to both state legal industry and cannabis consumers, such as providing lower prices for retail products and providing greater flexibility on who can legally consume cannabis and where. It will also allow marijuana businesses to access banking institutions at a new rate. And that's been a big problem for the industry because of federal law. I've actually had my bank accounts closed 20 different times since 2007, and 18 of those times they would not tell me why they were closing my bank account. Only twice did they say it's because I help medical marijuana patients. But this proposal ideally will also encourage lawmakers and the state and federal level to take further steps to amend and repeal cannabis prohibition. However, our political opponents are pledging to take whatever steps are necessary to derail this proposed policy change. In fact, within minutes of the Drug Enforcement Administration's announcement, a major prohibitionist group issued a press release announcing their intent to, quote, oppose the Attorney General's decision in the rulemaking process and challenge any final rescheduling decision in the court. Basically, the prohibitions are taking this stance because they know this change may very well mark the beginning of the fall of federal cannabis prohibition. In the coming months, we anticipate high-profile battles over the fate of federal rescheduling. Some of those battles may take place in the courts, others may take place in the halls of Congress. In fact, the people who are funding the fight against this are largely the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, elite, fascist sons of a bitches. And they are the ones who started marijuana prohibition to prohibit hemp and give us alcohol instead. So the alcohol industry is a large funder of this fight against marijuana. And Democrats on Capitol Hill are vowing to go farther and decriminalize marijuana. Senator Cory Bush of New Jersey, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer reintroduced their bill, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, this Wednesday. The senators now say they have 18 senators supporting their bill and are working to garner additional support. Obviously, they need 60, apparently. They need a supermajority to move forward under their current rules. But it's a step forward. If you are a loved one, need help finding a doctor who can help you get a medical marijuana permit, we can refer you to a doctor anywhere in the United States. Call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Thanks for watching and help us restore hemp. So now we're going to show this panel from, it's called Cannabis and Health. And I was pleased to be joined by Dr. David Knox, an associate of our clinic for over a decade. Dr. Rachel Knox, who's both an MD and an MBA, and she worked at our clinic when she started. Jana Champagne, who has her master's in science in nursing and is a retired nurse and a board-certified herbalist. Brenda Eisen-Aiken of Southern Oregon Patient Awareness Center. Brenda worked with me for a number of years as well. Martin Martinez, the author of The New Prescription, Marijuana as Medicine, and a novel called A Flower Rises. And Helvi Masika, federal medical marijuana patient since 1988, who the federal government gives 300 joints a month to, or 6 pounds of marijuana a year. And last but not least, Michael Kravitz, a groundbreaking international medical marijuana activist and military veteran organizer. All of these people have been on our show before, with the exception of Brenda. Welcome, Brenda, and let's go to that interview.
I want to take a minute to talk about the legislature. As in my role as legislative director, I've been down there now for the last 12 years. 11 years, I guess, starting with the 2013 legislative session, where before we actually became Compassionate Oregon, in Oregon, to qualify for the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program, as Brenda will speak to in a little bit here, you have to have a debilitating condition that's outlined in statute. And one of the things that had been missing for a number of years was PTSD. So in 2013, with the help of my own legislator, my own senator, we introduced a bill that would add PTSD to that list of debilitating conditions. And a couple of years later, we lowered the fee for veterans to $20 a year for their card. Right now, Oregon has, unless you qualify for a reduced fee card, has the highest card fees, annual card fees, of any state in the country, $200 a year. That can be really complicating for low-income people that really need cannabis and really need the protection of the program. Then the next thing that got added to the list was, pervasive and degenerative neurological conditions. Kind of a mouthful, but it pulls all the spectrum issues, autism, Asperger's, all that into qualifying conditions, and things like lupus as well. Those sorts of things can be included. The healthcare professionals will talk about that here pretty soon. But what I wanted to get to was, in 2023, Compassionate Oregon worked with Representative Tran, Representative Deal, Senator Przonski, and several other people that signed on to a bill that would have allowed, permitted the use of cannabis in hospice and end-of-life care rather than opioids as an option, as a alternative to opioids. And a lot of people, that go through end-of-life care, they keep them pretty well sedated with morphine. It's called keeping them comfortable, but it really denigrates the ability for those people that are, here for the last few weeks, spending time with their family and not being all, sedated. So we want to get hospice. They did this in California about 3 years ago. So now hospitals have to permit a patient to use cannabis in their hospital if they're in hospice. So my point in all this is it's really good. It's called Ryan's Law in California, and we tried to do it in 2023 here. In 2025, the representatives has agreed to carry the bill again. And we've gotten an agreement with the chair of the House Healthcare to have a hearing on it. So what we're hoping is that if any of you are interested in helping with this bill, what we're trying to develop is a group of people that have had experiences with their dying relatives or friends and had to deal with hospice and all that, and having their family all sedated out. And this would give them an opportunity. So what we're looking for is if you could put your email address and name, phone number on the sign-up sheets over there. We're trying to create a group of people that have had to deal with this, lost their people, and couldn't talk to them in the last couple of weeks because they were all morphined out. So we're going to take a run at it again, but we need those personal stories and the help to get the rest of the legislatures convinced that this is a good idea. We're going to take the approach that it's a quality of life issue, and that seems to carry the day when you start talking about quality of life and how cannabis can help facilitate that, whether you're in hospice or getting up every morning and going to work. So with that said, if you would like to help be part of that effort to push this through in 2025, feel free to leave your name and email address and we'll reach out at the appropriate time. So at this time, are we ready for Zoom?
We can start.
We're going to bring up on the screen our Zoom participants.
Yeah, we're getting that.
We're getting there, so I'm going to pick this up and walk around a minute because I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Rachel Knox. Yeah, that's Jana. Let's get to Rachel. Hi, Jana. It'll take a minute. We got to get through the technical parts of it, so everybody be patient. It's our IT folks.
She's muted. Can she unmute herself?
What's that?
Not sure we have Rachel in, Anthony.
We don't have Rachel in yet?
I don't think so.
Okay.
She was provided.
Okay, and Michael is?
Okay, Michael. There's Michael.
Let's start with Rachel.
Okay, please ask Rachel.
But before we start, at this time, I'd like to go ahead and ask the people in the audience that are our speakers to go ahead and come up to the stage. Dr. Knox, Dr. David Knox, Paul Stanford, Brenda Thomas, and what else you got here that's coming up? Martin, he's right over here. Come on up. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. How is everyone? Everyone can unmute themselves if you'd like, so we can hear you, I hope.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm Anthony.
Good.
Wish I could be there with you all.
Jana, you okay today?
I'm good. How are you, Anthony?
I'm good. Great. Michael, how are you?
Doing great. It's good to see you all, at least virtually.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So we're bringing some of the speakers up to the table right now. But Rachel, Dr. Knox, we'd like to start with you because the audience somewhat sparse, just saw your TED Talk. So why don't you start off telling us a little bit more about the endocannabinoid system and why it's good for us.
Absolutely. I hope you all enjoyed that talk. It was a very timely talk. It happened, in 2019, before a lot of states legalized. I feel like of the states that are legal now, half of them weren't at the time that I gave that talk. And I just felt it was very important to get behind the science of why cannabis is medicine. So as you all know now, I'm Dr. Rachel Knox, and hi Dad. My dad is there with you, Dr. David there. And I am a family and integrative medicine physician by training, but an endocannabinologist and cannabinoid medicine specialist by curiosity and just happenstance. I returned home here to Oregon in 2015 after finishing my residency and got involved with Paul Sanford at the THCF, his clinic, and started seeing patients, and patients had a lot of questions. And I felt really unprepared to answer their questions. And as I was taught in training, if you don't know the answer, you look it up. And surprise, surprise, there was so much evidence, so much data, enough research to help me explain to patients what to use, when to use it, how to use it. And that information really galvanized me to take really my efforts and my passion beyond the clinic, to bringing the science to policy and regulation. So I joined the Oregon Cannabis Commission with Anthony Taylor back in, we were first appointed in 2017 and started our first term in 2018. My first year I was the vice chair of our commission, and then chaired the commission for the next 2 years until I was sort of plucked from our commission onto the psilocybin advisory board, because lo and behold, psilocybin works on the endocannabinoid system too. So I did chair the equity committee, and then for a term was the vice chair of that committee as well. And there's a lot more I can say, but I won't go any further. I'll just land here in that today I am the creator and co-founder of the Cannabis Health Equity Movement. My co-founders in this movement, and I agree in one mission and vision and philosophy, and that is that we need to be using the cannabis plant to its ultimate utility across its agricultural, industrial, medical, and even nutritional innovations to fast-track communities to total health and well-being. We firmly believe we could do that in our lifetime, and within the bounds of regulation and policy, and even out of the bounds where we can be creative, we intend to achieve that.
Amen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rachel. We're gonna move to Jana now. Jana, why don't you give us just a little bit of background of who you are and what you've been doing and how you think cannabis is gonna help make us a little bit better.
Thanks, Anthony. So my name is Janet Champagne, and I am a cannabis patient first and foremost, and I became a cannabis patient in 2012, and at the time I happened to also be a nurse. And it was a very surprising and enlightening journey. And I was very fortunate because I started off with not a lot of resources to help guide my cannabis use. Although my intention was strictly medical, I was seeking cannabis for pain relief. As a nurse, I knew I did not want to start down that opioid pathway. I had seen where patients with chronic pain ended up when they took that route, and was very motivated to find an alternative. So that was my introduction to cannabis as medicine. And cannabis went on, even though I didn't know what I was doing, and it was, at the time in 2012, it was homemade quality THC and THCA was all I could get my hands on in Oregon. And luckily it did manage my pain, but also using intensive full extract cannabis oil every day, 6 months later, my lupus autoimmune labs actually seroconverted. So I went from positive for lupus on 2 tests to negative for lupus ever since, for the last decade. So that really got my attention. As a nurse, I didn't understand how cannabis could do something that the prednisone and the Plaquenil and all the other medications I was taking couldn't touch. And so I did this deep dive into the research at the time, trying just to understand how my autoimmune seroconverted using cannabis therapy. And I actually found a study that explained that intensive use of THC can actually help to suppress the immune system specific to the area that launches that self-attack we call autoimmune. So there was actually research explaining it. So then my next question was, why didn't I learn about this product or this system in our body called the endocannabinoid system that you heard Rachel speaking about in her video? Why didn't I learn this in nursing school? Why did they omit an entire system of our human body from my anatomy and physiology and pathophysiology courses that I had taken? So to me, that began this journey of learning what they failed to teach me in nursing school. And it has served me very well. I went on just a couple of years later to begin cultivating and caregiving for patients. During that same time, my daughter with autism became my #1 patient, and cannabis actually helped to spare her from out-of-home placement due to her severe behaviors from puberty crisis. And at the time, she was self-injuring. We had holes at every wall, holes through doors. Everybody in her vicinity was getting beat up. So it was a pretty severe situation. And cannabis was the option I chose for her after objectively assessing the other pharmaceutical options to treat her behavior, which were the antipsychotics risperidone and Abilify, which have horrific side effects. You know, the FDA off-label drugs, you know, antidepressants, anxiolytic, benzodiazepines, even seizure medications. All of those have side effects that can really profoundly impact quality of life and even be life-threatening. So my passion just continued to build as I was working with my daughter and working with these patients I was growing for. And that led to consulting with patients as a nurse, which I did for several years, thousands of patients, helping them optimize their medical cannabis outcomes through a really well-informed and educated approach, assessing things like pharmaceutical interactions, which are super important. And then in 2019, I sort of jumped into legislative advocacy when the Oregon State Board of Nursing actually passed a ruling saying that nurses in Oregon were not allowed to educate patients about cannabis anymore. And this, considering that we had had more than 25 years of legal access. And so my attorney, Leland Berger, and I fought that in 2021, and that's a whole process that I'm sure we'll talk more about later. But this is really where I started getting in and understanding that on the legislative and regulatory level, we are not upholding our medical ethics for cannabis patients in Oregon. So that's another big passion maker of mine. Currently, I'm serving many roles. One is professor of cannabinoid medicine at John Patrick University, teaching integrative and functional medicine students this science that we're failing to teach them otherwise in medical and nursing schools. I'm also founder of 501c3 Autism Safe Haven, which is committed to creating cannabis-inclusive healthcare for those with autism and even patients beyond. What else do I do? My goodness. I'm also a board-certified herbalist. Through this process, I became very disenchanted with the regulation of nurses in Oregon and actually retired my nursing license 2 years ago in boycott of their unethical policies. So it's really taken me a lot of different places, and I just look forward to digging in a little deeper with you as we talk with Anthony today. So thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate it. The next person on the Zoom is Michael Kravitz. Michael Kravitz is the Executive Director of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, headquartered in Virginia, and has been instrumental, in working at the international level in getting cannabis rescheduled through work with the WHO, World Health Organization, and convincing the United Nations to reschedule cannabis from their worst and most dangerous drug down to their least dangerous drug. Michael, why don't you take about 5 or 6 minutes and give us a little background, and then we'll get into some of this other work you've been doing and the rescheduling as we proceed. Michael.
Oh man, it's so great to, I'm really a little bit at a loss for words. Joining a group like this is such an esteemed group. I really tip my hat to each and every one of you. It's an honor to be here and to rub shoulders with y'all. So I really loved your slideshow, Paul. Really, fantastic. And the TED Talk, I hadn't seen it yet, so that was really, really great. And, gosh, the work that you're doing on autism is inspiring. So, yeah. But I realize as I'm coming on here, I'm a couple of years behind, more than a couple of years behind. I had been giving somewhat regular briefings on everything going on internationally when we were out there at the Hemp Fest. And without that, we kind of lost a little bit of a line of communication, I realized. The work that I do internationally goes back to Oregon. I'll explain that in a sec, but I think before that, you need to know that I came into this sort of vicariously, randomly, you might say. I had sort of turned my back on the cannabis world when I joined the military, joined the Air Force, and that was back in 1982. I could have gone a different way, a different universe. Maybe I would have joined the cannabis movement instead of the Air Force, but I didn't. And I got hurt in 1986. So late 1980s, I was going through surgeries and getting put back together from an injury I sustained just going home from work in the Air Force on the little island of Guam. I actually read myself in, you might say, into the cannabis movement. When I was retraining after the Air Force, I was at Virginia Tech. I was studying computer architecture and thought, how cool, I've got all this infrastructure at my disposal. I sort of used my ability to take advantage of those kind of assets under Virginia Tech normal. And that's how I sort of came in at the cannabis movement at the bottom level, handing out flyers at an info table, and worked my way up from there to 1997, going on a pilgrimage out to Bill Condi's farm. It was the first hemp extravaganza. And I was going out there specifically because I knew Jack Harris, and Dennis Perone, Sandy Burbank, Chris Conrad, all were going to be in one spot at one time. So I wanted to talk to them about this idea I had to go to the United Nations the next year in 1998. And much to my surprise, they didn't have anybody to connect me to. I thought, they'd say, hey, go work with this person or that person already doing this or that. Instead, they said, well, that sounds great. Tell us how it goes. And I go to the United Nations in 1998 with basically a clean slate and a bunch of chalk and just, go see what you can do. So, 1998 to 2008 was really infrastructure building, working on getting badges for our movement, working on creating whatever infrastructure we needed, reseated the New York NGO Committee, basically established new lines of communication for the Vienna NGO Committee on how to communicate with the United Nations on drug policy. And just for the record, we're tied at the hip, at least until we change the U.S. law. The way the U.S. law is written right now, we're tied at the hip with the treaty because we've written it into our U.S. federal law. And much to my surprise, after finishing that project, which was just that, something for our ancestors to be able to take advantage of in the very distant future when they might be able to change the law, we actually were able to change the law in 2020. I picked up working on, interesting looking at your slideshow because Japan accidentally slipped into it, Paul, when they put forth a resolution at the United Nations to outlaw cannabis seeds. They got really mad because I think our buddy Mark Emery got under their skin, and there was college students growing cannabis, in their dorm rooms in Japan. And they went storming into the UN saying, we need to outlaw cannabis seeds. And seeds are exempt, totally exempt. They're written into the treaty as exempt, no doubt about that. So when they asked for them to be outlawed, that was a bigger lift than I guess they had imagined. It started a process going with the World Health Organization that had been dormant for 15 years. And again, taking advantage of infrastructure, we worked through a change in both the World Health Organization position, but also their recommendations back to the UN then changed the international law. So working from a new international law since 2020, our federal government has been stunting our growth. Other countries like Canada, the Netherlands, and others have engaged the world on a world level on medicinal cannabis. Very legal, very, very, very legal, very, conventional, very cool. thing that we should be participating in at the world level, and we're being held back by our federal government. And Oregon is certainly poised to lead the way. So I'm amazed at where we are, and astounded, but also aghast, at the same time. And I'm coming here to talk to you and basically saying that, where you feel like you've been fighting and beating your head against the wall and you've come to the end of the road in some cases, this is actually the beginning of a whole new road. And we're just now getting there. As soon as we open the gate between the states, by opening up the gate at the federal level, have interstate and then international commerce. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's where the future is and where my work is focused now, is on that international commerce, which actually has found myself butting heads with and tearing down the final shreds of colonialism. Yeah. Not something I expected to work on, but here I am. I'll be talking about things like the Nagoya Protocol and the Convention on Biological Diversity, International Association for Cannabinoid Medicine, Patient Council, Veterans Action Council, Cannabis Embassy, how to legalize cannabis without violating the treaty. I told you I've got a lot to catch up on since the last time we talked. Much love, man.
You have certainly been blazing the trail, Michael. Michael and I are fellow Air Force veterans, by the way. Okay, I'm going to go to the table to our live panel, and I'm going to just go real quick. Dr. David Knox, Paul Stanford, Michael Martin Martinez, Martin, and Brenda Thomas, and we're going to start with Brenda. And Brenda, just give a little bit about yourself. How long have you been doing cannabis for patients? And I know you have a clinic, so just get 4 or 5 minutes on what you're doing for patients.
So I'm the loud, obnoxious one with the trucker mouth. So I can't believe we still have to debate this shit. Can you believe that we still have to do this?
No.
It's crazy. And it's getting worse and worse every year as far as the medical program goes. I've been doing this for a long, long time. Before I met Paul, I was with Brent Kenyon for about a year, and then Paul ended up taking a big chance on me. We had a lot of fun together. First clinic we had, I had the most patients ever seen in one day, 75 patients. And it just showed the need in our area for what we were doing. We also got to go see Willie one time. Paul called me up in the middle of the night, almost middle of the night. He says, "Hey Brenda, you know how to make that oil stuff?" "Yeah." "Can you bring some up for Willie?" "Duh, okay." So me and my wife, Dar, went up there, and at the time she was going through stage 4 cancer and was bald as a bat, but I have a picture of her handing Willie Nelson our oil. And I owe that to Paul. I owe a lot to Paul. Paul really did a lot for me as an advocate and growing into this. Because I didn't pick cannabis, cannabis picked me. Mostly because of my wife. She had had 6 back surgeries and had been on Vicodin for over 25 years when we moved up here. And by the time she passed away last year, she was not taking any pills at all. So I'm very proud of her for that. Also went to prison for the cause. I got arrested because they figured out who I was and what I did for a living. They threw everything they could at me. I ended up doing 10 months. I appealed, I won, I got everything expunged, but I still spent that time in prison. But I would do it again for the cause if I had to, I would. And then I got out and started doing cards all over again. One thing that bugs the heck out of me is our statistics. When I started doing my own clinic in 2013, we had over 75,000 patients, over 15,000 growers. I brought the statistics with me that I just printed out 2 days ago. We have 15,000 patients. We have 3,800 growers. Recreational has killed our program. It really has, and they also promised us they would not let that happen. So I'm also in the middle of trying to figure out if we can do a class action lawsuit against the state. Grower fees are expensive. Those poor growers have no way to get rid of their medicine to a producer. We had it in the legislature, in the Senate, the Senate walked out the House last year, and we lost the chance for growers to be able to sell to producers. So anything that you see legislatively that you can support to help growers sell to their patients, sell their leftovers so that patients can get free medicine is what we've been doing. So in my office for over, well, since 2013, even before then when I was still working for Paul, we would set up patients with growers. We would just literally, at first we just had signs up, the grower's name and phone number, you could tear it off and call them. Eventually it turned into, I find the growers, I find the patients, and I hook them up together and watch them throughout the season because I do the metric reporting. Metric is very, very hard for the patients, and it's just a lot of work. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, the hospice. Somebody was talking about hospice and getting cannabis in hospice. My grandma was on hospice for 9 days, fed full of morphine and whatever else they could give her to basically kill her, is what I thought they were doing. She wanted cannabis. She would tell me, I need my cannabis. She was 93 years old. She had lived in Arizona in a non-supportive state and was a non-believer for many, many years. And then she moved out here and I met her and I helped her get rid of the cancer that she had for her whole life. So she was off of all of her cancer meds and everything else when she passed away too. So she'd be like, I just want my cannabis, I just want my cannabis. So we need to do everything we can to help the patients, keep this program alive. Because without us, there was no rec. So, right? All right, keep fighting even though we shouldn't have to.
Thanks, Brenda. Appreciate it. I know for a fact that Brenda and Paul and myself, and I don't know how many other people in this room have suffered under this damn drug war and had to go to court. You know, I had to justify our existence for using cannabis, and it's not very pleasant when you have to look at the judge and he looks at you and says, oh, you're going to go away for a few months. So anyway, I'm going to jump now to Dr. David Knox. Dr. David Knox has been working and recommending cannabis for patients for the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program now for a few years. Has recently retired from all that. We're all sad to see him go, of course. And I'm just going to let him take it from here. Doctor?
Thank you. I'm Dr. David Knox. I got into the cannabis space virtually 9.5 years, maybe 10 years ago. After my wife Janice actually started working with Paul. That's where I got started too, working for the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation clinics. Back in the day when we would travel around the state of Oregon and Washington and see lots of patients. So prior to that, I spent 40 years as an emergency physician and didn't know squat about cannabis. You see cannabis patients, but periodically tell you I'm a cannabis patient. Yeah, okay, so what does that have to do with your emergent problem today? It's easy to ignore it. But particularly after my wife got started and it became clear, we're not looking at a bunch of stoners. We're not looking at people who are looking to get high. In fact, a majority of patients tell I don't want to get high. I want to have a cure for my medical problems. And so it changed your whole mindset. And as an emergency physician, we deal with a lot of pain. In the cannabis clinics, after you see a few thousand people who are telling you that I'm able to get off my opiates, manage my opiates, have a better quality of life, you start to believe it. And also, that was my introduction. And when you see the spectrum of people with medical problems that get benefit from cannabis, it's just astounding. Some of these clinics, I saw a father and son duo with porphyria, which is a medical problem I never even saw in an emergency room over my career. There's so many aspects to cannabis as a medicine. I've been primarily patient-focused, seeing a lot of patients. I always have to say, I've had more people thank me for what I'm doing in the cannabis clinics than in 40 years in the emergency room. But anyway, that was the start. You know, you get an introduction to the patients, as Rachel mentioned. You know, initially, these people know more than I do. I don't know anything, so it was a matter of getting yourself educated, and you know, basically it was a family project. We started doing the research, reading the research, you know, finding out that the big lie they tell you is that, oh, there's not enough research. There's so much research, but it's not easy to do. You know, historically, all research has been geared to prove that cannabis is an evil actor. Even today, with more enlightenment, more push to do the research, 80% of cannabis research is still geared to prove the negative. So, you know, even today, I was reading the news spread on the online. CNN came out with an article, because it's 420, about all the negatives about cannabis, and you know, so you know, you can't deny that they are there, but you know, what does that have to do with medical use of cannabis? You know, just like anything, it can be used appropriately, or it can be misused, or it can be abused. And it really comes down to, you know, education for the masses, you know, but it's not there. I don't know how old the statistic is, but even, you know, a few years ago we were saying like 7% of medical schools teach anything about the endocannabinoid system, let alone cannabis pharmacology or physiology. You know, it's improving today. We're getting more institutions that are incorporating, you know, courses on the endocannabinoid system. But like so many things in medicine, you get that subject maybe on one day out of 4 years. So there's still so much that needs to be done. And so even though I'm retired now from doing clinic work, seeing patients, we're still working on educational programs that hopefully we're going to end up making a difference. But, you know, I just have to mention that I'm fully retired from cannabis medicine at this point, from doing clinical work. You know, not totally voluntarily, because the Oregon Medical Board is still not a friend of medical cannabis. I always find a way to, you know, pinch you legally, as you mentioned you've been through.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Okay, I have never met Martin, and I'm going to go to him next. And you're from Washington. You're a Washington patient, cannabis patient, through their program. I'm not sure, so give us 5 minutes, do a little bit of history.
I'll do a little introduction.
Okay.
Yeah, Martin Martinez has written a book called Medical Marijuana, the New Prescription, and A Flower Rises. He's written, he's been an activist for medical marijuana for a long time in Washington State, and worked with the Seattle Hemp Fest.
Hi. My voice is a little soft. I was hit by a car on a motorcycle crash when I was a young man, and it was in 1986, and it was very bad, 60-mile-an-hour crash. So my voice is a little bit disabled. I was terribly injured, and there were, you know, I was thought I would never walk again. I was thought I would never use this right arm again because my nerves were severed and they don't reconnect according to the science of the day. And but they said I would never walk again, and they were giving me so much morphine that I could barely get my head off the pillow. So it would of course be a miracle if I could even get out of bed. But I got out of the hospital and I got home months later, where I could just use a lot of cannabis and foregoing the narcotics. The problem with narcotics is, you know, they're painkillers, but they don't just kill pain, they kill everything. And when you have neurological damage and nerve injuries, particularly narcotics are basically ineffective. on that sort of pain. And there was no such thing as medical marijuana in the terminology in American culture at that time. I just knew that it made me feel better, and the narcotics made me feel nothing besides, frustration and disability. And so my success, I will tell you all, I've smoked marijuana every day of my life since I was 14 years old, except for when I was in the hospital, and except for when I was in jail. And I am 64 years old. I'm very healthy, strong, capable. I'm a carpenter, and I climb ladders, and I do all sorts of physical work. And I owe it all to cannabis, really, literally. I've been prescribed so many drugs, I can hardly remember them. And none of them were effective at all compared to cannabis, which is very good for the body's natural health and well-being, as opposed to all the single molecule pharmaceuticals which are advertised on TV with a list of precautions that far outweighs why you would ever want to take a drug that would cause all those risk factors. Anyway, so that's my personal success story, but it's in the backdrop of the drug war, because 10 years after my motorcycle crash, I was hit with police and banging down my door for growing my medicine. I went to trial in Seattle in 1996 in the first medical necessity case for medical marijuana. And, they couldn't convict me, but they came back a month after the trial and busted me again. And so I spent 2 years in terrible hardship personally, and great loss in my employment and my fiance and my residence and all sorts of tremendous damage, and all along, they were trying to get me to not go back to trial and not fight this. And, they're trying to offer me a year probation and everything. I'm like, I can't live without cannabis. If I sign that paper, I'll have to take a drug test, and then we'll put me in jail. It doesn't matter anything else. I can't live without cannabis, so I had to fight, and I fought, and through it all, the Medical Use Act of 1998 was born, and that was a tremendous boon, and we had a cadre of patients, and we were all excited. Wow, we've succeeded in changing the law, and we thought everything would be great, but of course everything was not great. It was much worse, actually, because the patients became targets. And I ended up going to court for a lot of other people, for dozens of other people who were wrongfully prosecuted for using nature's greatest medicine. And, I fought and supported patients' rights for 20 years. And with people dying and, having problems with the law and all sorts of terrible difficulties, just trying to, get a joint, it's just crazy what so many millions and millions of people are going through over the best substance on earth made for, our health and well-being. It's really insane. So we fought, and I spent 20 years of my life trying to help make cannabis available to patients. That's all we were trying to do. I needed it, everyone needed it, and we had this law, and we built further avenues with this law in Washington State, and then came the legalization of recreational use. And again, we were told, that the medical people will be fine. We're just going to legalize for everyone else. And, we supported that, of course, but that's not what happened. What happened was the medical cottage industry, which I helped create and codified in law, was tossed out the window. As soon as recreational marijuana is available, supposedly the patients get a break because they get taxes. They have no taxes in Washington in the stores. But that's not enough because, first of all, this is not medical grade cannabis sold in the recreational stores for people who just want to get high on the weekends. That's not medical grade cannabis. People like myself and serious patients use cannabis every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and everything in between. And as much higher doses than recreational people with no inebriation, because we are patients and we're not using it to get high, but rather just to feel normal, or to get us through the day, or whatever gets us through the night. But it's been a terrible war, and when we get to the end of it, it's given away, and we're lost, and we're left with nothing but this broken system, which does not have organic, natural medicine. It's synthetic, it's not controlled. Do you know there are over 250 pesticides that are allowed to be grown on cannabis in Washington State? And that's not medical marijuana. So the fight continues, it always does, it always will, I'm afraid. In the Atlantic, the magazine The Atlantic last week, there was an article that said almost nobody is happy with legal marijuana. And of course the medical end, we have gotten, the short end of the stick here at this time. And we need to revitalize. We need to reestablish our rights and extend them. And, just like the Buddha, we put our hand down on the ground, we say, we are here, we belong here, and we can't make us go away. We will not just simply go silently into the night. Thank you all for everything you do.
Thank you, Martin. So, Paul, just real quick, because I want to get back to our people that are on the screen. When we first started all the cannabis dispensaries and we were getting cannabis to patients was through the buyers clubs model, where you paid the store, $100 a month, and you got access to all the cannabis you needed. And those eventually morphed into the clinics once we had medical legalized, and you were part of all of that. Paul, why don't you just give us just a quick little snapshot of what it takes to get into a cannabis clinic?
So first of all, you need to have a medical condition. The largest category is chronic pain. Then come things that cause persistent muscle spasms. Then there are seizure disorders, cancer, neurological disorders, and as Anthony helped spearhead, post-traumatic stress. Once you have one of those conditions, you can have a attending provider. Today in Oregon, that means a MD or medical doctor, like Dr. David Knox and Rachel Knox, a nurse practitioner, a naturopath, a couple different types of nurses. I can't remember them all, actually. But one of those people that qualifies as an attending provider has to write out the attending provider form from the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program. That's different from Washington. But and if the doctor you've been working with has recommended medical marijuana to more than 100 patients, then the medical marijuana program will also require a second piece of documentation where the doctor notes reviewing the patient's medical records, advising the patient of the risks and benefits of medical marijuana, and the treatment plan. And so once you have those two documents, you turn them into the state of Oregon with a payment to the state. The payment, if you don't have a discount, is $200 annually, which is just outrageously high. If you name someone else as a grower, or you are your own grower, and you don't grow at your own residence, you also have to pay another $200, and that isn't discounted. If you have SNAP, or also known as food stamps, then the annual fee is $60. If you have the Oregon Health Plan, then that annual fee is $50. If you're a veteran or you have supplemental security income, which is not disability, it's a separate program for low-income people from Social Security. And it confuses a lot of patients, because if you have SSD, why don't you qualify? Because only SSI qualifies for that discount. Now, if you are a disabled veteran and you have a disability rating of more than 50%, then you don't have to pay any fee to the state. You just have to turn in your application annually and turn with a doctor's note. But if you have 100% disability from the Veterans Administration, then you don't have to have the doctor fill out your paperwork every year. This is kind of a new thing. So then you turn in that paperwork to the state. There's 3 ways to turn it in. One is you can drop it off at a Dropbox at their office in Portland. You can mail it with a check or money order, or you can file it online on the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program's website. There's an advantage of filing online with your credit or debit card in that within 48 hours after filing online, you get a temporary 30-day receipt, which is treated like a medical marijuana card. It has a barcode and a QR code and a registration number, so you can immediately start getting the discounts at your local dispensary. That discount generally is 20%. It also will take off local, municipal, county taxes. You can also grow quite a bit more marijuana. Every household in Oregon can grow 4 plants, but each patient can grow 6. And so 6 flowering plants. You can also have 36 plants that are less than 2 feet tall and not flowering, 12 plants that are more than 2 feet tall and not flowering, in addition to your 6 flowering medical marijuana plants. I live with my wife. We're both patients, so we're allowed 12 flowering medical marijuana plants, and our son lives at home, so we have 4 recreational plants as well, even though he doesn't use them. So we're able to flower a total of 16 plants. If you have 2 patients or less at your own home, at your residence, you don't have to report through the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program. If you aren't growing at your home, or you name someone else as your grower, and you have 2 patients or less, you have to file reports with the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program once a month through their website. If your grower has 3 or more patients, they have to sign into the metric system, pay $480 a year, get all kinds of little RFD tags, report every single movement of your cannabis. For instance, say I was your grower and I was going to take you some marijuana and I was in the metric system, I would have to file a report saying, I'm going to take marijuana to you and I'm going to turn left on my street, turn right on the highway. I'd have to note the route I'm going to take. Then I'd have to file another report saying I am leaving. Then I'd have to file another report saying I have delivered the cannabis now. And if you mess up at any of these stages, you're subject to a very public discipline and fine that's listed just like you were a liquor law violator. So that is the way it is. I do want to say, though, that I've been arrested for growing marijuana several times. And I've also been arrested for possession. And I was arrested in the United States Capitol with possession, and it was a felony because I had a prior growing felony. So And then I got busted for growing marijuana again in 91, went through trial in 93. The jury would not convict me of cultivation, even though I admitted I'd done it. The jury wouldn't even convict me of 2 flowers in my pocket. But I allowed, instead of going to another trial and having a hung jury, I allowed the judge, Jones, God bless him, to find me just guilty of the 2 flowers in my pocket. So the prosecutor couldn't charge me. The prosecutor was a guy named Jonathan Hobb, and he was assistant U.S. attorney. He couldn't recharge me in a hung trial. So I was able to get a 30-day sentence in a halfway house for simple possession of marijuana. So I have 2 simple possession convictions, one in the United States Capitol, one in my home. Last year, I received pardons from President Biden because President Biden, in October of 2021, issued a pardon for everyone filed under federal law for simple possession. So I'm happy to say that President Biden pardoned my simple possession convictions. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
If you guys want any of that information he was talking about as far as statistics and how many plants you can have, I do have sheets up there that you can take home with you.
Thank you, Brenda. All right, so I'm going to ask of our medical professionals, 2 doctors and nurse. So the endocannabinoid system is what keeps us in homeostasis, and I'm wondering how one tells if they're out of balance and how they get back into balance. And then the second part of that is, let's talk a little bit about contraindications for cannabis in your healthcare, because there are some. So let's start off with Dr. Rachel Knox. She's still with us, and let's listen to what she has to say. Thank you, Rachel.
That's good. Great question. Our endocannabinoid systems, as you learn, are always in a state of flux. Right? They're always adapting, responding to internal and external stimuli to keep us well. When 1 in 2 Americans, and that's probably an underestimate, are sick with something, we can be confident that at least half of us, and I would say a majority of us, are probably dealing with some sort of endocannabinoid system dysfunction. Now, there are certain conditions that we consider classical diseases of endocannabinoid deficiency. So having a deficiency in anandamide or 2-AG, right, the cannabinoids that our body makes on their own. And I like to use the example or the analogy of vitamin D deficiency, right? We can be deficient in certain things in our body, and that holds true for our endogenous cannabinoids and the cannabinoids that our body makes. Some examples are PTSD, that is a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. So it's a syndrome that has been proven to show low circulating levels of anandamide, which honestly made it make sense why so many of my patients with PTSD chose THC as their preferred medicine. THC is analogous to anandamide. So whereas I might have a vitamin D deficiency, I take vitamin D externally. Someone like with PTSD with an anandamide deficiency would take THC externally to restore that balance. I'm glad Jan is here, because what is emerging as another probable clinical endocannabinoid deficiency is autism, which is really concerning to our anti-THC establishment, because yes, many children with autism, not all, but many benefit directly from THC. Others from other cannabinoids as those leads. So yes, we have data to show that people can be deficient in endocannabinoids. People can also have other sorts of dysfunction, like receptor expression issues. But I hope the point is clear, right? So we can test for and prove that people have deficiencies or otherwise dysfunction of their endocannabinoid system. And recent research shows us that when you use cannabis, we can restore balance. My dad and I are co-founders of Pivotal EDU, an education company all around cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, and we have a monthly webinar. It's free, so hopefully we can get that information out to you all. But this month we had Dr. Bonnie Goldstein with us last week, and she has participated in some remarkable, phenomenal research proving that cannabis is an adaptogen. An adaptogen is a substance that helps maintain balance in the body. And what her research showed was that in autistic children, certain biomarkers are out of range, right? They're abnormal. After treatment with cannabis, those biomarkers come back into range. Now, those abnormal biomarkers, when out of range, are consistent with certain symptoms, right? Certain issues, certain behavioral changes that are considered abnormal. And again, when the cannabis was administered to these children, within 90 minutes, we saw a reduction in that symptomatology. We saw a reduction in those behaviors. And certainly as the cannabis wears off, those things come back. So we have evidence, proof, that cannabis helps restore balance by working directly and indirectly on our endocannabinoid system. So I hope that helps answer the first part of that question for you, Anthony.
Beautiful.
Jana? Oh, thank you, Dr. Knox. I really appreciate that. Jana, you have also been working, trying to get guidelines and scope of practice issues dealt with the Oregon State Board of Nursing, and I just want to know how that's coming along and what you foresee in the future in the ability of the nurses who are first line of defense for our cannabis patients taking a bigger role in cannabis and healthcare.
Yes, and just to segue from the autism topic, the part of the reason I'm fighting and advocating that nurses have a scope of practice adopted by the Oregon State Board of Nursing is because I'm building a cannabis inclusive healthcare model to serve my daughter with autism and other families and patients that might benefit from having cannabis included in their care, meaning the caregiver is actually touching the product and administering the product, and the state of Oregon is not too fond of that. But part of the solution is to make sure that our nurses are supported in this role and that they're comfortable doing so. And in order to do that, we really need the State Board of Nursing to declare that they're supporting nurses serving cannabis patients. Sorry, my daughter's right there too. So like Rachel was talking about, with autism specifically, we have this really strong evidence that part of what causes autism is an endocannabinoid deficiency, meaning that kids with autism and adults with autism are lacking the ability to produce these vital nutrients internally. And of course, anandamide is what we find is deficient, which is replaced pretty synonymously with THC. So really, really high impact, and it's been so vital for my daughter with autism that, now she's 22. Tomorrow is her birthday, actually. She turns 22, and it would be her preference to be living more independently. It would be my preference as a parent to be living a little bit more independently and not providing her hands-on care day in and day out. I'm still her primary caregiver, and the barrier to that is she's literally having to choose between having accommodation in a licensed care home to live and receive her care and have access to her cannabis therapy. And to me, it's no contest. I'm not going to put her in a position where she won't have access to her cannabis. It's been that vital to her progression, her quality of